I
Let
told
me
you what
stay
would
here
happen
and
if we
I'll give
waited
you
too
what no
long.
white woman
Now they're
can.
here, and we
Apache
have to go
woman
right
begging to the
now.
cowboy. The sun was high over the Arizona desert, painting the rugged landscape in shades of gold and ochre. The air was dry and still, carrying only the occasional whisper of the wind through the sparse scrub and twisted juniper trees. A lone cowboy rode slowly along a narrow, dusty trail, the creak of his saddle and the soft clatter of his horses' hooves the only sounds in the vast emptiness. His name was Eli Thompson, a man in his early 30s with a weathered face, sun-darkened skin, and eyes that had seen more of the wild frontier than most men ever would. He had been traveling for several days, moving cattle from one territory to another, and now he was searching for water, shade, and perhaps a quiet place to rest. The desert was unforgiving, and Eli knew it well. He had learned to read the land, to watch the sky for the sudden storms that could sweep across the plains, to follow the tracks of animals that led to hidden springs. But even with all his experience, the solitude of the desert sometimes weighed on him. It was a silence so deep that it could make a man question his own thoughts, his own sanity. And today, the silence felt different. There was a tension in the air, a sense that something unusual was near. As he rounded a bend in the trail, Eli noticed a small figure at the edge of a rocky outcrop. At first, he thought it might be a traveler like himself, but as he drew closer, he realized it was a woman. She was standing tall and steady, despite the heat and the harsh terrain, her dark hair falling loosely over her shoulders. Her clothing marked her as an Apache, and Eli's heart skipped a beat, not from fear, but from the realization that he had wandered near a native settlement. The woman did not hide. She watched him with eyes that were both cautious and bold. Eli slowed his horse, unsure of what to do. He knew the history between white settlers and Native Americans was filled with mistrust and conflict. Stories of raids and revenge, of families torn apart and lands taken by force, were part of the world he had grown up in. Yet here was a young Apache woman, standing in the open, unafraid, her gaze meeting his with steady intensity. "Hello there," Eli said cautiously, raising a hand in greeting. His voice sounded foreign in the stillness of the desert. The woman tilted her head slightly, studying him. Then, in a voice that was surprisingly strong and clear, she spoke words that made him pause. "Let me stay here," she said, "and I will give you what no white woman can." Eli blinked, taken aback. Her words were shocking, even in the quiet desert where few people dared speak boldly. He had encountered many challenges in his life, storms, wild animals, and hostile outlaws, but nothing like this. He studied her carefully, trying to understand what she meant. She seemed sincere, yet there was an urgency in her tone that suggested more than mere words. The woman, whose name was Nayeli, stepped a little closer. Her movements were graceful and confident, yet careful, as if she knew the dangers of approaching a stranger. She explained, slowly and deliberately, that she and her family had been forced from their lands. Settlers had claimed the fertile valleys where her people once farmed corn and beans, and the soldiers had pushed her tribe further into the hills and deserts. She spoke of hunger, of fear, and of the constant struggle to survive. Her offer to Eli was not a casual one. It was a plea for protection, a desperate attempt to secure safety in a world that seemed intent on taking everything from her. Eli listened, his horse shifting nervously beneath him. He had heard similar stories from other Native Americans, from travelers and traders who had crossed the frontier, but hearing it from someone so young, someone standing right before him, made the reality undeniable. Nayeli was not asking for charity. She was asking for understanding, for a chance to be seen as a person with courage and wisdom, not just as a member of a displaced tribe. For a long moment, neither spoke. The desert seemed to hold its breath along with them. Eli's mind raced. He thought about his own life, the long days on the trail, the loneliness, the dangers he faced from nature and men alike. He thought about the moral lines he had been taught to follow, about the codes of conduct that governed interactions with native tribes. Yet here was a person, vulnerable yet brave, offering something that challenged everything he had learned. Finally, he spoke. "Why me?" he asked. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "Why now?" Nayeli's eyes softened. "Because you are alone and because you have the strength to choose," she replied. Her words were simple, but they carried weight. She was not threatening him, nor was she demanding anything. She was presenting a choice, offering a moment of connection in a harsh and often unforgiving world. Eli considered the implications. Accepting her offer would be risky, both socially and personally. It could bring him into conflict with settlers or soldiers. It could put him in danger from those who did not understand his intentions. Yet refusing her could leave her vulnerable, facing a world that had already taken so much from her people. He shifted in his saddle, studying the surrounding landscape. The sun was beginning its slow descent, casting long shadows across the desert. The air was cooler now, but the tension remained. Nayeli did not flinch. She remained where she stood, waiting, patient and composed, her presence both challenging and compelling. Eli finally nodded. Not to her words, not yet, but to the understanding that had passed between them. He could not promise anything, but he could acknowledge her courage, her strength, and her humanity. This was the beginning of something neither of them fully understood, a fragile trust forming in the heart of the desert, between two people from worlds that had long been at odds. As he dismounted his horse, Eli felt a strange mix of emotions: curiosity, apprehension, and an unexpected sense of responsibility. He had come seeking water and rest, but he had found a story unfolding before him, a story of survival, resilience, and the complicated intersections of culture and morality. Nayeli's eyes followed him, bright and unwavering, as he took careful steps toward the small rocky outcrop where she stood. They began to speak, slowly at first, sharing fragments of their lives. Eli told her of the trail rides, the cattle drives, and the lonely nights under the stars. Nayeli spoke of her family, her people, and the land they had once called home. There was no pretense in their conversation, no attempt to impress or deceive. It was honest and raw, an exchange between two people who had lived hard lives and understood the cost of survival. By the time the sun touched the horizon, painting the sky with brilliant shades of orange and purple, Eli and Nayeli had formed a tentative bond. There was no certainty about the future, no guarantees of safety or comfort. But in that moment, in the stillness of the desert, they recognized a shared humanity that transcended the boundaries of culture, language, and history. The first night in the desert fell quietly. Eli made a small camp nearby, careful to respect the space of Nayeli and her family. The wind whispered through the rocks, and the stars emerged one by one, shining like tiny beacons over the rugged landscape. The world beyond the desert seemed far away, and for the first time in many days, both Eli and Nayeli felt a fleeting sense of connection, a momentary relief from the harsh realities that surrounded them. Eli knew the encounter would change him. He did not yet know how or in what ways, but he sensed that this meeting was significant. It was not simply about survival or necessity. It was about trust, courage, and the willingness to see another human being in all their complexity. Nayeli, in her quiet strength, had challenged him to reconsider his assumptions, to question the lines drawn by society, and to recognize the power of choice, even in a world that often denied it. As the desert night deepened, Eli watched the flickering firelight and felt a cautious hope. The journey ahead would not be easy. The frontier was full of dangers, both natural and human. But for now, there was understanding, and there was the beginning of a story that neither of them could have predicted, a story that would test their courage, their morality, and their very humanity in the days to come. Eli woke early the next morning to the soft light of dawn, spilling across the desert. The cool air carried the faint scent of sagebrush and the distant cry of a hawk circling above. He rubbed his eyes, still heavy from the restless sleep that came with the weight of yesterday's encounter. Beside him, the small campfire had burned low, leaving only smoldering embers. He took a deep breath, feeling the crisp air fill his lungs, and began to reflect on the meeting with Nayeli. He remembered her words, the unusual courage in her voice, and the way she had looked at him without fear. She had offered something shocking, yes, but more than that, she had revealed a reality he could not ignore. This was a young woman whose life had been shaped by hardships beyond what most men could imagine. Her family had been driven from their land, their safety threatened, and yet she stood before him with dignity, strength, and the determination to survive. That combination of vulnerability and bravery had left a mark on him. As he prepared a small breakfast of bread and dried meat, Eli's mind wandered to the journey that had brought him here. Life on the frontier was never easy. Cowboys like him spent long weeks traveling across deserts and plains, facing harsh weather, dangerous animals, and the constant threat of outlaws. Yet even in his hard life, Eli had never truly understood what it meant to be hunted, displaced, or powerless in your own land. Nayeli had given him a glimpse of that reality. After breakfast, he mounted his horse and moved slowly toward the rocky outcrop where Nayeli had waited. He was careful not to startle her, and when she saw him approaching, her eyes softened with a mixture of curiosity and caution. Today, there were no bold words or challenges, only a quiet acknowledgement of each other's presence. She nodded politely, and Eli returned the gesture, understanding that trust had to be earned in this land. "Good morning," he said, his voice low yet steady. "Good morning," Nayeli replied, her tone calm and clear. "Did you sleep well?" "I did, thank you," Eli said. "And you?" "I slept enough," she answered simply. Her eyes lingered on him for a moment as if measuring his intentions. "The night is safer now. There are fewer dangers when the sun is up." Eli understood immediately. In the desert, the day brought both relief and new risks. The sun could be punishing, but it also allowed for safer travel and easier observation of the land. "You're right," he said. "It is easier in daylight, but the desert is never truly safe." For the next several hours, they talked cautiously, sharing pieces of their lives while remaining aware of the fragile trust between them. Nayeli told him about her family's journey across the desert after their home had been taken. She described the nights spent under the open sky, the fear of soldiers or settlers finding them, and the small victories that allowed them to survive another day. Eli listened intently, realizing that each story revealed both hardship and resilience. She explained that her people had been forced to leave fertile valleys and move into the harsher, rocky terrain. Life here was difficult, water was scarce, and food was limited. Hunting was dangerous, and traveling far for supplies risked encounters with those who did not welcome them. Yet despite these challenges, Nayeli's voice carried no bitterness. She spoke with quiet strength, showing a deep understanding of her world and the choices she had to make to survive. Eli shared parts of his life as well, though more cautiously. He told her about his travels, the cattle drives, and the loneliness that came with long days on the trail. He described the dangers he had faced, storms, rattlesnakes, and the occasional thief. But he knew these struggles were different from hers. Her challenges were not simply physical. They were rooted in displacement, fear, and the constant need to protect those she loved. The conversation shifted naturally to more practical matters. Nayeli asked Eli about the land ahead, whether it was safe to travel and where water could be found. He offered advice and guidance, pointing out areas where springs might be hidden, how to recognize signs of wildlife, and the safest paths through the rocky terrain. She listened closely, asking questions, and demonstrating a keen understanding of survival in the desert. It was clear that she had learned from experience, that her knowledge was not simply inherited but earned through hardship. As the day wore on, Eli began to notice small details about Nayeli that he hadn't seen before. The way she moved with quiet confidence, stepping carefully over rocks and loose sand. The determination in her eyes when she spoke of her family's survival. Even in her youth, she carried the wisdom of someone who had faced the world and refused to be defeated. Eli felt a growing respect for her, tempered by caution. He knew that forming a bond in this environment required patience, sensitivity, and careful judgment. By mid-afternoon, the heat of the sun became intense, and they both sought shade under a large boulder. Eli took the opportunity to study the surrounding area. The desert stretched endlessly, a mix of jagged rocks, sparse vegetation, and the distant outlines of mountains. It was beautiful in its own harsh way, but also unforgiving. He realized that survival here was not simply a matter of skill. It required constant attention, awareness, and respect for the land. Nayeli had mastered this balance, and Eli admired her for it. In the quiet of the afternoon, a small wind kicked up, rustling the leaves of scrub and sending dust swirling across the ground. Eli looked at Nayeli, and she met his gaze without hesitation. There was a moment of understanding between them, an unspoken acknowledgement of the dangers that surrounded them and the trust that was slowly growing. They did not need words to express the bond forming through shared experiences, through mutual respect and recognition of each other's strength. Nayeli spoke then, breaking the silence. "You are different from others who pass through this land," she said softly. "You do not fear what you do not understand. You are cautious, but you listen. That is rare." Eli felt a flicker of pride, though tempered by humility. "I have learned that rushing to judgment can be dangerous," he replied. "There is more to survival than strength or skill. There is respect and understanding. That is something you seem to know well." The hours passed, and the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon. Shadows stretched long across the desert, and the temperature dropped slightly, offering some relief from the heat of the day. Eli and Nayeli prepared to set up a small camp near the boulder, careful to leave space for both of them. There was a quiet efficiency in their actions, a rhythm born of experience and necessity. As night approached, they sat near the small fire they had built, the flames flickering and casting dancing shadows on the rocks. The sky turned deep blue, dotted with countless stars that shone brightly over the desert. It was a breathtaking sight, and for a moment, both Eli and Nayeli allowed themselves to simply watch the night sky, letting the silence and beauty of the desert fill the space between them. Eli reflected on the day, on the conversation and the shared moments of understanding. He realized that he had learned more about resilience, courage, and the human spirit in these few hours than in many years on the trail. Nayeli had not only shared her story, but had also challenged him to consider his own beliefs, assumptions, and the limits of his courage. For Nayeli, the day had been a test as well. She had measured Eli's intentions, gauged his character, and discovered that he was not just another stranger passing through the desert. There was a quiet honesty in him, a willingness to listen, and an understanding that went beyond words. In a world where trust was rare and danger was constant, that was a precious discovery. As they settled near the fire for the night, Eli felt a growing sense of responsibility. The desert was unforgiving, and the journey ahead would test them both. Yet he also felt a cautious hope. Here, in this harsh landscape, two people from very different worlds had found a connection, born not of convenience, but of mutual respect, courage, and the shared desire to survive. The night deepened and the fire burned low. Eli and Nayeli rested, each aware of the challenges yet to come, but also aware of the fragile trust that had begun to form between them. The desert stretched endlessly around them, full of beauty, danger, and uncertainty. And in that vast, quiet wilderness, a story was unfolding, a story of survival, morality, and the unexpected bonds that could emerge even in the harshest of circumstances. The morning light slowly crept over the desert, casting long shadows across the rocky terrain. Eli awoke before sunrise, as was his habit, and stretched, feeling the stiffness of a night spent sleeping on hard ground. The cool air carried the faint scent of sagebrush and dust, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote let out a soft yip. He glanced at Nayeli, who was already awake, sitting cross-legged on a flat rock, her eyes scanning the horizon with quiet alertness. Eli admired her calm focus. She had an unusual awareness of the land, a skill that came from years of living close to nature and understanding its hidden patterns. It was more than survival, it was a deep knowledge, a kind of wisdom that only hardship could teach. He realized once again that this young woman carried a strength far beyond her years, and he felt a growing respect for her. "Good morning," he said softly, not wanting to disturb her. Nayeli turned her head and smiled faintly. "Morning. The desert speaks differently at this hour. You can hear it if you listen." Eli nodded, understanding what she meant. There was a subtle language in the wind, the shifting sand, the movements of animals, an unspoken communication that could reveal danger or opportunity. He had learned to read some of it himself, but Nayeli's connection to the land was deeper, instinctive. They shared a simple breakfast of dried meat and water, the quiet morning allowing them to gather their thoughts. Today, Eli felt, would be an important day. The trust that had begun forming between them needed careful handling. He could see that Nayeli was testing him, gauging whether he would act with wisdom, patience, and respect, or whether he would follow impulse. He wanted to prove he could be counted on, not only for his own sake but for hers as well. After breakfast, they began walking together along a narrow trail that wound through jagged rocks and sparse desert vegetation. Eli noticed how carefully Nayeli moved, placing each foot with precision, as if she were aware of every loose stone and hidden crevice. She moved with a quiet confidence, and he found himself trying to match her pace, learning to read the land through her eyes. As they walked, they spoke more about their lives. Nayeli described her childhood, the playful moments with her siblings, and the stories her elders had shared about the lands they once lived on. She spoke of rituals, of songs sung under the moon, and of the close relationship her people had with animals and nature. Eli listened intently, realizing that much of what he had taken for granted in his own life, freedom of movement, land to call one's own, safety, was something she had lost, something her people had been denied. Eli shared some stories from his travels as well, speaking of long cattle drives across the plains, nights under star-filled skies, and the dangers of the frontier. He spoke carefully, choosing words that conveyed his experiences without diminishing hers. Nayeli listened, occasionally nodding, occasionally asking questions that showed a sharp mind and a natural curiosity. Despite the differences in their lives, there was a common thread. Both had learned to face danger, to endure hardship, and to rely on their own skills to survive. As they moved deeper into the desert, Eli noticed signs of recent activity: broken branches, footprints in the sand, and small piles of stones marking paths. Nayeli pointed out subtle indicators that he might have missed: a bent twig signaling a small animal's movement, a rock displaced by someone passing recently, the faint scent of smoke carried on the wind. Her knowledge of the land was extraordinary, and he felt a mix of admiration and humility. "You know this desert better than I ever will," he said quietly. She smiled, not with pride but with a calm acknowledgement. "It is part of me," she said. "I have to know it, or it will take more than it gives. Survival is not just about strength, it is about understanding." Their conversation was interrupted by the distant sound of hooves. Eli froze, and Nayeli motioned for him to crouch behind a large rock. He could just make out the shapes of two men on horseback, approaching quickly along a nearby ridge. From the distance, It was unclear whether they were friendly or hostile, but in the desert, caution was always necessary. Naomi's eyes narrowed, and she whispered instructions, guiding Eli to a safer position and teaching him to move silently. The men passed without noticing them, but the encounter reminded Eli of the dangers that surrounded them. In this land, strangers could be allies or threats, and one had to be vigilant at all times. Naomi's skill in assessing danger was unmatched, and he realized how much he had to learn from her. It was not just her courage that impressed him, but her ability to think clearly and act decisively under pressure. Once the riders were gone, they continued their journey. Eli asked Naomi more about her people's displacement, about the conflicts with settlers and soldiers, and about the ways her family had adapted to survive. She spoke with honesty, avoiding exaggeration, but not hiding the difficulties they faced. The stories were sometimes painful, but they were also filled with resilience, with small victories that allowed her family to endure. By midday, they reached a small, hidden spring nestled between rocks. Water was scarce in this part of the desert, and Eli marveled at Naomi's ability to find it. She showed him how to recognize the signs of water beneath the sand, how to dig shallow holes that would reveal moisture, and how to purify it for drinking. Eli realized that she had mastered the art of survival, combining knowledge, observation, and intuition in a way that few people ever could. They rested by the spring, drinking and replenishing their supplies. Eli felt a growing sense of connection with Naomi, not just because of the shared hardships, but because of the trust that had developed between them. She had tested him, guided him, and shared her life in a way that required both courage and honesty. In return, he had listened, learned, and treated her with respect. As they rested, Eli thought about the future. The journey ahead would be difficult, and the world outside the desert was not forgiving. There were settlers who might view Naomi's presence with suspicion or hostility, soldiers who enforced laws without regard for fairness, and outlaws who sought to take advantage of anyone who seemed vulnerable. He realized that protecting her was not just about physical safety. It was about understanding the complexities of the world they lived in and making choices that balanced courage, morality, and practicality. By late afternoon, they resumed walking, following a trail that led toward higher ground. The sun was lower now, casting long shadows across the rocks and sand. Eli noticed that Naomi moved more freely in the fading light, her steps confident and sure. She seemed to know exactly where to place each foot, how to navigate the uneven terrain, and how to conserve energy for the journey ahead. He followed closely, learning from her example and gaining a deeper appreciation for the skills she had honed through years of necessity. As evening approached, they found a sheltered spot for their camp, protected from wind and hidden from view. Eli gathered firewood while Naomi arranged a small sleeping area, her movements efficient and deliberate. They shared another simple meal, and as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they talked quietly about hopes, fears, and the possibilities that lay ahead. Eli realized that this day had changed him. He had begun to see the world through Naomi's eyes, to understand the challenges her people faced, and to appreciate the strength it took to survive in a harsh and often unforgiving environment. Naomi, in turn, had assessed him, determined his character, and allowed a fragile trust to form. Their bond was built not on convenience or necessity alone, but on mutual respect, shared experiences, and the recognition of courage in another human being. As the night deepened, Eli and Naomi sat near the fire, the flames flickering and casting shadows on the rocks. The desert around them was vast and quiet, full of hidden dangers and untold stories. Yet in this small space, a connection had been formed, a connection that neither could fully understand but both could feel. It was the beginning of something fragile and precious, a trust that would be tested in the days to come. Eli stared at the stars, reflecting on the day's events. He knew the journey ahead would not be easy. The desert would demand vigilance, wisdom, and patience. But he also knew that he had found an ally, a guide, and a friend in Naeli. Together, they had faced the challenges of the day, navigated the dangers of the land, and learned from one another. It was a small victory, but a meaningful one in a world that often offered so few. As they settled to sleep, Eli felt a quiet sense of determination. He would continue to learn from Naeli, to respect her knowledge, and to honor the trust that had begun to grow between them. The desert was vast, the dangers real, and the future uncertain. But for now, there was understanding, connection, and the hope that they could face whatever lay ahead together. The desert morning was cooler than usual, and a thin layer of mist clung to the rocky ground. Eli woke early, as was his habit, and noticed Naeli already standing, scanning the horizon with sharp, careful eyes. There was a tension in the air, subtle but unmistakable. Today, Eli sensed, would test both of them in ways they could not yet predict. After a quick breakfast of bread and dried meat, they began their journey through a narrow pass that led toward higher ground. The terrain was more rugged here, with jagged rocks jutting from the sand and the occasional dry creek cutting through the valley. Every step required caution. Naeli moved with her usual grace and precision, but Eli could see the alertness in her eyes. She was watching, listening, and constantly evaluating their surroundings. "Be careful here," Naeli said quietly, pointing to a series of fresh hoof prints in the sand. "Someone has passed this way recently. They may be just travelers, or they may be looking for trouble." Eli nodded. The frontier was unpredictable. Even a moment of inattention could lead to disaster. He slowed his pace, following her lead, and tried to read the subtle signs she had learned to notice from years of living close to the land. Broken twigs, displaced rocks, and faint tracks all told a story, and Naeli knew how to read it. He was beginning to understand that her survival depended not just on courage, but on constant vigilance, patience, and sharp perception. As they walked, Naeli shared more about the difficult choices her family had faced. She spoke of nights spent hiding from soldiers who patrolled the area, of rationing food and water carefully, and of using secret paths to avoid settlers who did not welcome them. Her stories were never exaggerated. They were simple accounts of resilience, of making do with what little they had, and of protecting one another in a world that often seemed determined to take everything from them. Eli listened quietly, realizing the depth of her experience. He had faced dangers before, but they had been mostly physical: storms, wild animals, or the occasional outlaw. Naeli's challenges were different. They were both physical and social, tied to her identity, her family, and her people. She had to navigate a world where trust was rare, and betrayal could come from anyone. That required not just courage, but intelligence, careful judgment, and an understanding of human nature that he was only beginning to grasp. By midday, they reached a small ridge overlooking a dry valley. From this vantage point, Eli could see miles of desert stretching in all directions, dotted with rocky outcrops and the occasional clump of scrub. The view was both beautiful and intimidating, a reminder of the vastness of the land and the isolation of those who lived within it. Naeli pointed out several markers in the valley below, a small cluster of smoke rising in the distance, footprints leading toward a rocky formation, and the faint glint of sunlight on metal. Eli followed her gaze, realizing that the signs indicated a potential threat. Travelers or raiders might be nearby, and they would have to navigate carefully to avoid confrontation. "We should move quietly," Naeli said, her voice low and firm. "Keep to the rocks and stay out of sight. If we are seen, it may cause problems for both of us." Eli agreed. They descended carefully, using the natural cover of rocks and scrub to stay hidden. Each step was deliberate, measured, and slow. The desert, which had seemed so peaceful just days before, now felt alive with danger. Every sound, The whisper of wind through the rocks, the distant cry of a bird, the soft crunch of sand beneath their feet carried meaning. As they moved, Eli reflected on how much he had learned from Naeli. She had taught him to observe, to anticipate, and to act with caution. Her guidance was not just practical. It was a lesson in survival, morality, and the careful choices required in a world that often offered no easy answers. Her strength and intelligence were evident in every movement, every word, every glance. Suddenly, the sound of voices reached them, low and cautious. Eli froze, and Naeli motioned for him to crouch behind a large boulder. He could see two men on horseback moving toward the area where they had just passed. They were armed and seemed to be searching for something or someone. Naeli's eyes narrowed as she studied their movements, assessing their intentions. "They are not friendly," she whispered. "We must be very careful. Follow my lead." Eli nodded. He had learned to trust her judgment, and now he had to rely on it completely. They moved silently along a narrow ledge, keeping low and using the rocks for cover. The men passed within sight but did not notice them. Eli's heart raced, but he remained calm, focusing on every instruction Naeli gave. She guided him with quiet precision, and together they avoided detection. Once the danger had passed, they continued their journey, moving more cautiously than before. Eli realized that this experience was a turning point. The desert was not merely a backdrop for their survival. It was an active force, full of threats and challenges that required constant attention and cooperation. Naeli's knowledge, courage, and skill had kept them safe, and he understood that his own survival depended on following her lead and learning from her example. By late afternoon, they reached a sheltered canyon, a natural enclosure that offered protection from both the sun and potential threats. They set up a small camp, using rocks to block the wind and conserve warmth as the temperature began to drop. Eli gathered firewood while Naeli prepared a simple area for resting. Their movements were quiet, careful, and deliberate, a reflection of the lessons they had learned from the desert and from one another. As night fell, they sat near the small fire, sharing a quiet meal and reflecting on the day. Eli felt a growing sense of responsibility. The desert was unpredictable, and the journey ahead would test both of them. Yet he also felt a sense of trust and connection that had grown over the past days. Naeli had allowed him into her world, shared her knowledge, and guided him through danger. In return, he had listened, learned, and respected her choices. "Today was dangerous," Eli said, breaking the silence. "I don't think I could have made it without you." Naeli nodded, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "We each have our strengths," she said softly. "You have courage and you are willing to learn. That is important. But remember, survival is not about one person alone. It is about understanding, trust, and using our skills wisely." Eli realized the truth in her words. Courage alone was not enough in the desert. Survival required intelligence, careful observation, patience, and the ability to work with others. Naeli had demonstrated all of these qualities, and he felt a deep respect for her, as well as a growing admiration. The night deepened, and the desert became quiet except for the occasional whisper of the wind and the distant call of an owl. Eli watched the stars, reflecting on the journey so far. He understood that the challenges ahead would not be easy, that the dangers of the frontier were real and unpredictable. Yet he also knew that he had found an ally, a guide, and a friend in Naeli. Their bond was fragile but growing, built on trust, respect, and the shared experience of navigating a harsh and often unforgiving world. Eli thought about the people they had avoided today, the riders who could have caused them harm, and realized how quickly a simple encounter could change everything. The desert demanded constant attention, and one mistake could be costly. He resolved to continue learning from Naeli, to respect her knowledge and experience, and to act with care and consideration in every decision. Naeli, meanwhile, felt a quiet satisfaction. She had tested Eli, gauged his intentions, and discovered that he was not just another traveler passing through. He was willing to listen, to follow guidance, and to respect the boundaries of her world. That trust, once established, was a powerful tool, and she understood that it could make the difference between safety and danger in the days to come. As the fire burned low and the desert night stretched on, both Eli and Naeli prepared to rest. They were aware of the challenges that lay ahead, the harsh terrain, the possibility of hostile encounters, and the uncertainty of the frontier. Yet they also felt a quiet sense of hope, a belief that together they could navigate whatever obstacles came their way. The night was long, but it was filled with a sense of purpose. Eli and Naeli had faced danger, learned from one another, and strengthened a fragile trust that would carry them forward. The desert around them was vast, silent, and full of uncertainty, but within the small circle of firelight, they had found understanding, connection, and the courage to face whatever lay ahead. The desert morning arrived quietly, the sun rising slowly over the rocky hills and casting golden light across the vast, open landscape. Eli stirred from his sleep, feeling the stiffness in his muscles from another night on hard ground. He stretched and looked toward Naeli, who was already awake, her dark eyes scanning the horizon as though reading a secret language written into the land. There was a calm determination in her movements, a quiet strength that Eli had come to admire deeply. Today felt different from the others. The challenges of the past days, the long rides, the hidden dangers, the lessons of trust and survival, had changed them both. Eli realized that the desert had become more than just a place of hardship. It had become a teacher, a testing ground, and a mirror reflecting their strengths, fears, and resilience. Naeli had shown him the power of patience, observation, and courage, and he understood that the bond between them had grown stronger through shared experiences and quiet moments of understanding. They packed their small camp carefully, leaving no trace behind, and began walking toward the ridge that would lead them to safer ground. Each step was deliberate, measured, and mindful of the delicate balance between speed and caution. Naeli led the way, her movements precise, as if she could feel the land beneath her feet. Eli followed, learning to move with care, to notice the small signs of the desert's hidden life, and to trust in her guidance. As they moved, they spoke little, but each glance and gesture communicated understanding. Their journey had taught them that words were not always necessary. Shared experience, respect, and trust often spoke more powerfully than conversation. Still, Eli found himself reflecting on everything they had learned from one another, and he felt a deep gratitude for the lessons Naeli had imparted. By mid-morning, they reached a small plateau overlooking a wide valley below. The view stretched for miles, the desert unfolding like a tapestry of gold and brown, dotted with rocky formations and sparse greenery. From this vantage point, they could see the paths they had taken, the hidden springs they had relied on, and the distant trails that might lead them to safety. Eli felt a sense of accomplishment, not just for the physical journey, but for the growth he had experienced in understanding, patience, and courage. Naeli pointed to a narrow path that led down into the valley. "This way," she said softly. "It is safer. There are fewer eyes here, fewer dangers from those who travel the main trails. We will move carefully and reach a place where we can rest without fear." Eli nodded, following her lead. The descent was slow and cautious. Rocks shifted underfoot, and loose sand made each step uncertain. Yet Naeli moved with confidence, and he found himself trusting her completely, relying on her instincts as much as his own. In many ways, he realized, their journey had become a partnership, a mutual understanding built on respect, shared knowledge, and the recognition of each other's strengths. As they walked, Naeli shared stories of her ancestors, tales of courage, wisdom, and survival that had been passed down through generations. She spoke of people who had lived in harmony with the land, who had learned to listen to the wind, read the stars, and find sustenance even in the harshest environments. Eli listened with fascination, realizing that these stories were more than just history. They were lessons in resilience, strategy, and the human spirit. In turn, Eli shared his own reflections. He spoke of the lessons he had learned from traveling the frontier, the quiet understanding that came from surviving storms, navigating difficult terrain, and facing the unpredictability of the natural world. He spoke carefully, mindful of the trust Nayeli had placed in him, and of the respect that their shared experiences demanded. Their conversation was not boastful or dramatic. It was honest, thoughtful, and filled with an appreciation for the courage and skill each had shown. By late afternoon, they reached the edge of a small grove, a hidden oasis with water and shade, a rare gift in the arid desert. Eli could see the relief in Nayeli's eyes, though she did not speak of it. The place was safe for now, a temporary refuge where they could rest, replenish their supplies, and reflect on the journey that had brought them here. They set up a small camp, carefully choosing spots that offered protection from the sun and the wind. Eli gathered firewood while Nayeli prepared the area, her movements efficient and practiced. They shared a simple meal of bread, dried meat, and water, and as they ate, they talked quietly about what lay ahead. The future was uncertain, but the trust they had built allowed them to face it with a sense of calm determination. Eli realized that this journey had changed him profoundly. The desert had taught him lessons that could not be found in towns or cities: patience, observation, humility, and the value of trust. Nayeli had shown him the strength that comes from understanding and respecting one's environment, and the courage required to navigate a world filled with both danger and opportunity. He felt a deep sense of gratitude and admiration for her, and he understood that their bond, formed through shared experience, mutual respect, and quiet cooperation, was something rare and valuable. As night fell, they sat near the fire, watching the stars emerge in the deep, dark sky. The desert around them was silent except for the occasional whisper of wind and the distant call of an owl. Eli reflected on the past days, on the challenges they had faced, and on the lessons they had learned together. The dangers of the frontier had tested them both, but they had navigated them successfully, relying on skill, intelligence, and trust. Nayeli spoke softly, her voice carrying a quiet wisdom. "The desert is harsh," she said. "It does not forgive mistakes, but it teaches those who listen, who watch, and who respect its rules. We have learned from it, and we have learned from each other. That is something no danger can take from us." Eli nodded, understanding the truth in her words. Their journey had been about more than survival. It had been about learning to trust, to observe, and to act with wisdom. It had been about recognizing courage and strength in another human being, and about forming a bond that would endure beyond the immediate dangers of the desert. As they settled for the night, Eli felt a quiet sense of accomplishment and hope. The desert would continue to challenge them, but they had proven their ability to face those challenges together. The trust, respect, and understanding they had built were stronger than fear or uncertainty, and they would carry those lessons forward wherever their journey took them next. In the stillness of the night, Eli and Nayeli reflected on what they had achieved. They had navigated dangerous terrain, avoided threats, and learned from one another. They had shared stories, insights, and moments of quiet understanding that would stay with them long after the desert was behind them. The journey had tested them physically, mentally, and emotionally, but it had also strengthened them, forging a bond rooted in trust, respect, and shared experience. As the first light of dawn began to illuminate the horizon, Eli and Nayeli prepared to continue their journey. The desert stretched endlessly before them, full of beauty, danger, and uncertainty. Yet they were ready. Together, they had faced challenges, learned lessons, and built a connection that could endure. The journey ahead was unknown, but they knew they could face it with courage, intelligence, and mutual trust. Eli looked at Naeli, seeing in her eyes the same quiet determination and courage he felt within himself. He realized that the journey had not only been about reaching a safe place, it had been about discovering the strength, resilience, and humanity within themselves and each other. In a world that often offered uncertainty and danger, that discovery was priceless. As they set out from their small oasis, the desert around them began to glow with the golden light of morning. They walked side by side, alert, cautious, but confident. The lessons of the past days, the challenges they had faced, and the trust they had built would guide them forward. And though the frontier was vast and unpredictable, Eli and Naeli knew they had found something enduring, a bond formed in the harshness of the desert, strengthened by courage, wisdom, and respect. For both of them, the journey was far from over. But in the quiet strength they had discovered in one another, they found hope, courage, and the certainty that no matter what lay ahead, they would face it together. The desert had tested them, shaped them, and taught them lessons they would carry for the rest of their lives. And in that knowledge, they found both peace and purpose, ready to continue onward side by side, into whatever the future might bring.